Hello everyone, we are here again with another episode of The Fact, the series that discusses international issues every week. As you know, last week we had an attack which was basically happened on oil tankers on the Gulf of Oman and has brought so many claims and also consequences for the countries in the region. So in this program, we're going to talk about this issue, and we have three respected and distinguished guests tonight with us. We have Mr. Alexander Azadgan, Professor of International Political Economy and Editor-at-Large with United World International from USA, and also Ms. Setareh Sadeghi, Political Analyst and Commentator from Iran, and also Mr. Tobias Pfennig, Political Activist and Analyst from Germany. I would like to welcome all three of you. It is true honor for all of us to have you on the program. I would like to start with the first question from Mr. Azadgan. As you know, there has been so many claims about the countries which were somehow involved in this attack, and but still there is no absolute evidence about which country being behind this attack. So what would you say about this issue, and what would you make of this?
Before I answer this question, if you can increase the volume, Ali, so I can hear a little bit better. A couple of days ago, Mr. Pompeo, our Secretary of State, announced at the Secretary of State at the State Department that apparently, supposedly, they have evidence captured by their drones that Iranian IRGC boats were removing remnants of the mine that this oil tanker, the Japanese oil tanker, hit, which I thought was preposterous, because if the drone was already flying around, then they could have captured something more than just what happened afterwards. So this is what they do. They accuse a country of something, and then either they provide very unclear and basically ridiculous proof, so-called evidence, and then when you ask for more, they'll say, well, this falls under national security and we can't go any further. If you recall, all the accusations they made against Syria, the so-called barrel bombs that were supposedly dropped from Syrian helicopters, whenever you ask for any further evidence, so proper investigators could look into this, they just said, we can't disclose anything more. It's against our national security, and it will reveal the methods that we use to extract that kind of information, so we can make an accusal. Also, there's a precedent to this when it comes to IRGC fast boats. These accusations against IRGC fast boats towards the end of George W. Bush's administration, where an Iranian IRGC fast boat was rapidly approaching a ship, and supposedly they had audio to confirm that. And then when experts, linguists, actually tried to analyze this, what they were saying did not have an Iranian accent whatsoever. It had remnants of an Israeli accent. So this is what they do. They do something, they attack, they come up with these false flag operations. They don't have adequate evidence. And these days, just accusing a country automatically puts the blame on that country. And so these are the people we are dealing with. During the end of the George W. Bush's administration, we had basically the entire neocon makeup structure was behind that administration, and at that time, John Bolton was one of the junior advisors in that horrible administration. Now he is at the helm of power. The National Security Advisor is one of the most important advisory roles to the president. So we are getting this kind of very belligerent attitude from this man. There are some reports that he's so belligerent and actually physically abusive that he has grabbed some of his staff members by the neck, almost chokeholding them. I had some intelligence released to me by my sources. So this is a very vile human, if you can even call him a human being, a vile individual. And I think the record is very clear. Not too many weeks ago, there was another incident where 4 tankers were attacked. We believe these are all interconnected, and we believe Washington wants to recreate a narrative that was very close to the 1980-1988 war, during which oil tankers were regularly attacked either by Iraq or by Iran. Iraqis attacked the oil tankers that were transporting Iranian oil, and Iranian Air Force attacked Iraqi or just tankers or Iraqi tankers that were transporting Iraqi oil. This is the narrative they want to create again. They are trying to create a version 2.0 of the Iran-Iraq war, except that this time it's going to be Iran versus Saudi Arabia. So these two very powerful nations would neutralize each other. And this is being instigated by none other than the Israelis. The saying is that the Israelis will fight their wars to the last of the American soldiers. So we are being manipulated, in my opinion, by the Saudis and by the Emiratis. Of course, we have our own schemes, destructive actions that we take place in creating wars around the world. We have 800 military bases in 70 countries, and we stopped being a republic a long time ago. We are a colonialist, we are an imperialist, and we are a hegemonic power that wants to spread itself thin, much to the disagreement of the American people themselves. One of Mr. Trump's promises was to end the wars in the Middle East, especially in Syria. But what did we see? There were 2 missile strikes against Syria. Tens of missiles were directed towards Syria, many of which were captured actually by the Syrian anti-missile Scud systems. And that's the legacy of this president, whom some people are still supporting wrongfully. That they're saying that the neocons are trying to distance the president from having some kind of a reasonable mindset. This president is a chaos president. It's like letting a bull in a china shop. He has no understanding of anything, business or international trade and commerce, neither geopolitics. So we are in for another, I would say, year and a half of this kind of belligerent behavior. And unless Mr. Pompeo and Mr. Bolton will be removed from office, which I don't forecast to take place anytime soon, then we are stuck with this kind of behavior. And unfortunately, Ali, I have to forecast here that Mr. Trump is going to be elected or re-elected for another 4 years. So we are stuck with this man for 6 years, and God knows what he's going to do in his second term. The Japanese prime minister was in Iran a few days ago, and I thought it was very interesting. The country that, there was this joke going around in social media that Prime Minister Abe sort of was requesting from the Iranian leader that the country that nuked my country has sent me to tell you not to make nukes. It is absolutely ridiculous. And this attack was instigated because we believe the Japanese foreign minister was in Iran, giving a promise to the highest cadre of Iranian leadership that Japan will continue to buy the Iranian oil. And of course, Washington and our allies sent a terroristic signal to Japan. Both of those ships were carrying oil to Japan, by the way. One was under the Norwegian flag, and the other was under another flag. So U.S. was sending a strong message to, one second, let me finish it up. They were sending a strong terroristic message to Japan that if you go on with this, we're going to do what we have been doing to everybody, including France in the past few years. Every time they wanted to recognize Palestine as a state, there was some kind of a terroristic attack in France. So this is how they operate. They're diabolic, and there's no reasoning with Washington other than the stern methods of General Qasem Soleimani.
You basically brought up the issue of involvement of Saudi Arabia and also Israel and also all the different countries which were somehow involved in this incident. So I would like to ask about the same issue from Ms. Sadeghi about the consequences of such an incident for Iran, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and USA, and all possible countries which were somehow involved or affected by this incident.
Accusations against Iran coming from the U.S. is nothing new, and we are totally used to that. And not just against Iran, against just any country out in the world. The U.S. is thinks that they are fit to police the world, and especially the Middle East. We have seen their allegations against Saddam, no matter how barbaric his regime was. But they accused Iraq or Saddam's regime of possessing weapons of mass destruction. And after spending billions of dollars and killing thousands of innocent people, they said that there was no such a thing in the beginning. So this is something very trifling compared to all those allegations that they have had. Or just take the recent example of ISIS. They said that they were helping the rebels against the ISIS, but the weapons mistakenly were found in the hands of the same terrorists. So this is nothing new coming from the U.S. We have to first take that into account. And then at this point, it is not really clear who has done it. There's no evidence whatsoever whether Iran is involved or other country, as you mentioned, is involved. But we can guess by who would benefit the most from such incidents, such tensions in the region. I think the first to benefit is the U.S. This is like creating a security dilemma for Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates to be worried about, for example, Iran wanting to attack their oil tankers, or Iran wanting, or from attacks coming from others on any other tankers passing through the Gulf. So this security dilemma can increase purchase of weapons by the already arsenals, like Saudi Arabia and UAE are basically arsenals of U.S. weapons. And the more there is a fear of attacks on them, the more they have to, or they feel like they have to buy weapons to protect themselves. And for Israel, this is very significant because it is creating a safe haven for Israel to continue to commit its crimes against Palestinians and against Syria. Just recently, while everyone was busy with the tankers and the Iran issue, Netanyahu thanked Trump by calling this part of occupied Golan Heights as a Trump Heights. So, this is like creating a very a safe haven for Israel and providing it with supports. And the more there are tensions in other parts of the region, the safer Israel will feel, because everyone will get busy with themselves and they will totally forget the Palestinian cause. Of course, this is not going to happen, but this is what they are intending to make it happen. So this is what I believe will be the consequences. They may want to play this blame game against Iran to make Iran like always they do it, to demonize Iran on the international stage, but this is not working anymore. Like, nobody cares about U.S. accusations anymore. They also said that they have seen, or they have evidence collected by Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, that the IRGC poses a threat to U.S. interests in the region, but they never can reveal those reports and those evidence. who is going to believe that anymore? I mean, the people of the world may believe one or second lies, but when it keeps coming from someone like, especially Trump, who is known for, I mean, he's many lies and breaching so many deals, and his personality, nobody is going to believe that. There is no evidence. Even the video that they are claiming shows Iranians like installing a miner or whatever. First of all, the video is not clear at all. And some even are saying that it shows the exact moment when the Iranian boats were trying to save the survivors of those ships. So this is really ridiculous. So nobody is going to believe that.
Thank you so very much, Setareh, for the explanation. It is very interesting to also see and say that actually this incident happened exactly when the Prime Minister of Japan was meeting with Iran's leader in Iran. And some say that it is actually some kind of coincidence. But there might be some reason behind that. So Tobias, if you would like, I would like also to hear your opinion about this issue. But first, I would like to check your voice because I'm not sure I can hear your voice. So can you just, yeah, we don't have your voice. You just need to activate your, yeah, I can hear you now. Perfect. All right, so what is your take about this attack being exactly when, Prime Minister of Japan was meeting with Iran's leader? Dr. Azadgan, can you actually say your opinion about the same question, and then we'll go to Tobias later.
Mm-hmm. This is very interesting, Ali. Setareh mentioned Mr. Trump's chronic lying behavior. Washington Post, okay, this is a very reputable academic source, claimed that in every 24 hours, Mr. Trump lies 8 times. And up to now, he has lied 10,111 times. This is Washington Post. This is not us. This man is a chronic liar. He actually lied at the UNGA, General Assembly. He's so out of it. His narcissism, his arrogance is so out of it that he thinks he can appear in front of the UN and just blatantly lie. Also, I wanted to mention that the U.S. version for blaming Iran for these tanker attacks is now being openly challenged and questioned by Washington's European allies, which we are hoping would find their testicular fortitude and stop being vassal states to Washington and start looking to the east towards the Eurasian model, which is rapidly taking place because of all the missteps and miscalculations of Washington since 2001, at least, if you use that the time reference. You have to understand that anywhere between 25 to 40% of the oil supply, it varies. Some estimates are 1/3, which is 33%. Some estimates are 25%. Some estimates go as far as 30 to 40%. Go through the Strait of Hormoz, and 85% of that goes to East Asia, especially countries like South Korea, Japan, and China, which are economic superpowers. So cutting the Iranian oil, all these accusations or all these threats that Iran is not going to export one drop of oil is absolutely ridiculous, because there are much bigger, or shall we say, there are stakeholders in the world. We are no longer living in a unipolar world. We have all these other countries that have caught up with us, with the United States, and U.S. cannot just go on lying and using this bullying tactic in the long term. Yes, bullying tactics can come in handy in the short term, but in the long term, you will lose all your credibility, and countries will get together as they are. Mr. Putin has indicated that we gotta do away with the petrodollar system, and if that happens, which, by the way, if that actually manifests and starts happening, we will go into World War III. There's no doubt about that. The U.S. economy is an economy of $18.57 trillion. We are in debt around $21 trillion, and we are just printing money. We're not creating wealth. We're creating debt. And every time we get militarily aggressive around the world, everybody else is paying for it because of the petrodollar system. So the Japanese are just one player out of this. Iran is just part of this bigger puzzle. And we have people in Russia that are openly challenging this. Several years ago, there was a $400 billion oil contract between China and Russia, and the currency that was used in this oil exchange, not oil contract, in this oil exchange was in the Chinese yuan and the Russian rubles. That was a clear and present danger to the hegemony of the United States. And we find it very ironic, to go back to your question, that Washington tried to use Mr. Abe, the Japanese prime minister. After all, this is the country that was not nuked once, but nuked twice in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So this was in my opinion, is a very ironic and very, rude and inappropriate message to send a paper boy, to send a mailman, and having that mailman be the Japanese. I really, really enjoyed what the Iranian leader said, and we all heard that, his caption, that Trump is not even worthy to be given a message to. And so the leader said, I'm not going to even give him a message. I mean, that was, to me, that reminded of the founder, Ayatollah Khomeini, how he turned to the Soviet ambassador, Shevardnadze, and told him what he did. The videos of that are widely available on social media. I just saw it on Instagram. So we are entering a moment where the Iranians' patience has run out. They're standing up to the US and Europe, by the way. Europe reneged on all its economic promises and contracts to Iran. The Iranians are finally standing up to them, and the Europeans, we had the German foreign minister who was in Iran insulting Iran and then adding human rights excuse against the Iranians. And none of these countries fulfilled their economic contracts which were signed by President Rouhani. And to add more insult to the injury, they brought up the human rights issues. I would consult our German colleagues to looking into their own mess. They have no moral credibility to talk about human rights. This is a country that murdered millions of Jews in World War II, and in the past few years hasn't done anything constructive to restrain its neo-Nazis, its white nationalists or alt-right, whatever hell they want to call themselves. He hasn't done anything to stop these people, and all the discrimination and the attacks that are taking place against the innocent, some of the innocent Muslim immigrants. I'm not talking about the crazy terrorist Muslims, but the innocent Muslims. So he came to Tehran and was insulting the Iranians. This is absolutely outrageous, and he was threatening the Iranians that they're going to go back to sanctions. Well, Iran has nothing to lose. The sanctions were never really lifted, except for the SWIFT international banking transfer system. So, as the leader said right in the beginning, they got to go back to enriching uranium. JCPOA, in my opinion, was one of the worst deals ever in human history, as Mr. Trump says, but not for the rest of the world, not for Europe and US, for Iran. History will judge this deal as one of the worst deals ever. Because when this administration leaves office, Iran still cannot enrich its uranium, and for the next generation to come. And then who's going to answer? Mr. Zarif is not going to be there. Mr. Rouhani is not going to be there. So who's going to answer to the Iranian people when Saudi Arabia, as we're talking, is enriching uranium or is being given enriched uranium? They have no domestic know-how. All they have is money. All they are is a cash cow, like Setareh mentioned, and they may have a nuclear weapon very soon. And we all know Israel has over 300 nuclear warheads. So I think I was on record right from the beginning in international media expressing what is contrary, by the way, to the Iranian foreign policy, that Iran must have a nuclear weapon. Some said that the mutually assured destruction arrangement that we had during the Cold War was actually, if the abbreviation adds up to the word mad, that was madness. I'm not going to mention who said that, but it was a foreign minister of a certain country. I think that kind of naivete is absolutely dangerous. When you do have a mutually assured destructive model, war doesn't take place. Imagine a unipolar world where the US was on top of everything during the Cold War, they would have used nuclear weapon. General MacArthur actually wanted to use nuclear weapon against the Chinese during the Korean War, and President Truman had to fire him. So when in this region, you have Pakistan that has nuclear weapon, you have India, you have Israel. I think it's very reasonable for Iran to have nuclear weapons to defend itself. Iran is certainly not going to be able to defend itself using its 1960s and 1970s aircraft. And I'm talking about F-4, F-5, and F-14. F-14 was the most advanced airplane at that time. It's not going to be able to defend itself, although if you talk to Iranian pilots, they're very proud of those planes because they've upkept it. But this ridiculous, yes, 1 second, this ridiculous request by France, especially, that Iran should negotiate on this advanced missile deterrence system is absolutely ludicrous, coming from France, by the way, who is hosting a terrorist group like the MKO, and the president's lawyer, Mr. Giuliani, is being chummy with the leader of this group and rubbing elbows.
Thank you so very much. You actually shed some light on the next question, which is basically about the claim that USA and Saudi Arabia has made concerning Iran being behind this attack. So, Tobias, I hope we don't lose you this time, but I would like to know if there is any kind of evidence that Iran is somehow, involved in this attack or behind this attack or not.
So I think it's very obvious that there is basically not any facts which could be presented to us, because if there was any evidence that Iran was the perpetrator of this attack, then we would probably have seen this evidence. But in fact, we just have seen some obscure videos of some boats at another boat, and we cannot verify anything of that. We don't know what has actually happened there. Very important, because I think what is way more important is that this what happened just resembles something which already happened many times and in the past. And I would just like to recall the events which happened, for example, in 2013 in Eastern Ghouta near Damascus. Basically, it was very interesting that there was a chemical attack at the outskirts of Damascus, and basically the Syrian government invited United Nations observers and investigators to find out what happened there, what was going on, who was doing this attack. And right when these United Nations observers and investigators arrived in Damascus, there was actually another incident happening where I'm very sure that it's where the terrorists were attacking again Damascus and Eastern Ghouta, but for the world it was presented like that the Syrian government is bombing its own civilians with chemical gas and chemical weapons. But it's just a matter of rationality. Why would the Syrian government just invite somebody to investigate chemical attacks, and then on the same day when these people arrive to investigate the scene, it would attack its own civilians? It just makes no sense at all. And the same is happening right now in Iran with this tanker attack. Like, why would Iran bomb a Japanese boat right now when Japanese is trying to negotiate? So it just makes no sense at all. And I think there are only two main players which are interested in this conflict to happen, which is of course the US, and which is of course also Israel. And we can be very sure that Israel is capable of staging these attacks on the boats, and it is of course possible that either the US did these attacks on purpose, or that the US themselves have been lured into a trap by Israel. But even then, I think that the US could not just unsee the facts which are right now happening. And I'm very sure that even if Israel is behind these attacks, then we can be sure that there are certain circles, at least in the US, or which are very well informed that they were behind these attacks, and they're just not talking about it. So, as I said, I think it's a basic restaging of something which we have seen, some false flag attacks which we have seen in the past, not only once but in many times, and which have been basically the reasons for a lot of bigger wars, and it's basically a very dangerous situation right now, I think.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, Setareh, as you said and as you mentioned before, these kind of attacks, and also as other guests mentioned, these kind of attacks are somehow considered as some kind of excuse for starting a war with some country. And now this tanker attacks are being some kind of excuse for USA to say that here we should start a war with Iran. So do you think we will have to witness more attacks on tankers on either Persian Gulf or Gulf of Oman or not?
Well, I think as long as there are states or parties that are benefiting from attacks on the oil tankers or just any tensions in the Persian Gulf or in the Gulf of Oman, we can expect more attacks, especially that, like Tobias also correctly pointed out, Israel and the U.S. Are benefiting from these tensions in the region, either by selling weapons or by blaming Iran or by creating a safe haven for Israel. So as long as there are states involved and who are benefiting from these tensions, we can see more attacks. But we also have to bear in mind that these false flags created by the U.S. As excuses to justify their military presence in the region, and especially in the Persian Gulf, can no longer be trusted by the public opinion of the world, or at least the region. I mean, when once or twice you say that you have evidence for something, but you do not have, or you cannot provide the evidence, then the third time and fourth time, people are unlikely to believe you. And that, I think, paves the way for decreasing the tensions in that region, because, I mean, that's not something that will work for the U.S. anymore. But until that, as long as they can play the blame game or benefit from the tensions, we could witness more attacks. But hopefully not.
Thank you so very much, Setareh. I would like to go back to Tobias for the last question, which is basically somehow the future of such a sanction that might happen concerning Iran's oil. Do you think that if sanctions on Iran's oil get somehow serious, do you think it will end up in closing of Hormoz and starting some kind of oil tanker war in future, or not?
To be honest, I don't absolutely think that this will happen, but I think there are more likely scenarios which could actually result into some bigger conflicts. I think that right now we are on the verge of some kind of bigger global change. So what we're seeing right now is that China is trying to get competitive to the US. We're seeing that also, for example, if we're talking about oil, that the influence of oil actually right now is a bit dropping because the US is producing that much domestic oil and even exporting so much oil, so that I think we saw like this major fall of the oil price. I think that oil could in future. So basically, I think that we see that maybe in future oil could play a bit less relevant role in global economy, and instead what we're seeing is a huge confrontation between, let's say, Western and Eastern economies. Like, for example, right now China, obviously Russia, which is under sanctions, and I mean, doesn't end there. I mean, we're seeing sanctions against Venezuela, against Iran again, against so many countries. So basically, what we could say that there are right now, two major blocks forming. I would say one Western bloc, which is a European Union, US bloc, and one Eastern bloc, which could be led, for example, by China and Russia together with Iran. And even what we're seeing right now is, for example, that Turkey is again targeted by Western sanctions, and we're seeing that, for example, now this fighter jet deal with the US of Turkey is about to blow off, and that the US doesn't want to deliver the jets anymore. So right now, I think we're seeing a completely new kind of development and a completely new kind of confrontation. And I think if this confrontation in future will lead to a global economic recession, which is most likely because we have already seen less growth in the main markets. We have seen already a fall of all the emerging markets. Then I think what we are really on the verge of some kind of bigger conflict, which could be on one side economic, but also on the other side could be a major military confrontation. I mean, also the things which are going on in the South China Sea, I think these are all some kind of remarks which could lead to some kind of bigger, also military confrontation. And I don't think, of course, that the US has any possibility to actually invade, for example, Iran, because that would be a catastrophic disaster for the US Army, and that would, of course, lead them to nowhere. But I think that we could see some more of the actually regional conflicts which we have seen already in the past, like in Syria, with major players in these conflicts.
All right, thank you. Actually, we have come to the end of our program. I would like to thank all three of you, Mr. Azadgan, and also Ms. Sadeghi and Mr. Pfennig. It was truly an honor to have all three of you on the program, and it was a very great and informative talk with all of you. And for our viewers, you can actually check out our YouTube channel and follow our program. So hereby I would like to put an end to the program, and I hope we will have you again on the Fact. Thank you so very much, and goodbye.
Bye.